Malik sat in the back of the classroom, tapping his pencil nervously against the desk. His mind raced as the teacher handed out the quiz papers, each one carrying the weight of his deepest fears. This wasn't just any ordinary quiz. This was the test that would determine whether he could prove to everyone, especially his teacher, that he was more than just the kid from the poor side of town. He wasn't just some average student. He had dreams, big dreams. But sometimes, it felt like no one could see that. "Good luck, Malik," his best friend, Sarah, whispered from across the room, offering him a reassuring smile. He nodded, but deep down, he didn't feel lucky. He felt nervous. Malik was used to people underestimating him. He was used to hearing things like, "Are you sure you want to try that? It might be a little too hard for you," or "I'm not sure you're cut out for this." He'd heard those words all his life, not just from classmates but from adults, too. His teachers, his family, even strangers on the street, they all seemed to look at him and assume he wasn't capable of much. But Malik knew something they didn't: he was smarter than they thought. The clock ticked loudly in the quiet classroom as Malik flipped over his test paper. The first question was a math problem, a challenging one. He scanned the numbers quickly, trying to process the equation in his head. Normally, math was his strong suit. He could solve complex problems faster than most of the kids in his class. But today, there was a sense of urgency. He had to prove himself. His teacher, Ms. Miller, stood at the front of the class, eyes scanning the room as the students began to write their answers. Malik could feel her gaze on him. Ms. Miller didn't believe in him. Not really. Sure, she'd give him a passing grade every now and then, but it was always with the same tone: "Good job, Malik. But I know you can do better, or maybe not. Just try your best." Malik hated that. It felt like she was speaking to him like he was a kid who would never amount to anything more than average. "Focus, Malik," he whispered to himself under his breath, shaking off the frustration. "You've got this." As he worked through the quiz, he felt a flicker of hope. This test could be his chance to show them all, his classmates, his teachers, even himself, that he wasn't just the kid from the broken neighborhood with no future. He had something special inside him. A gift. An intelligence that no one had bothered to notice. And today, he was going to prove it. But, as the minutes ticked by, a sense of doubt crept in. What if he failed? What if he got the answers wrong, just like everyone expected? What if this was just another moment where he didn't measure up? "Just finish the test," he told himself again, gripping the pencil tighter, as his eyes moved across the page, solving one problem after another with ease. The equations and questions flowed naturally, and Malik felt his confidence begin to build, though the pressure never fully left. The bell rang at the end of the class, and Malik felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had finished. He'd done it. But as he handed in his paper, his heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't help but wonder, would Ms. Miller see what he had done? Or would she just dismiss it as a fluke, just like everyone else always did? As he walked out of the classroom, Sarah caught up with him. "How do you think you did?" she asked, giving him a hopeful look. "I don't know," Malik replied with a shrug, trying to hide the anxiety building inside him. "I just hope I did well enough to prove them wrong." "Who?" Sarah asked. "Everyone," Malik said, his voice a little quieter than usual. "Everyone who's ever doubted me." Sarah was silent for a moment, then gave him a quick hug. "You've got this, Malik. I know you do." He smiled, appreciating her support. But deep down, he still felt that gnawing fear, that sense that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't enough. He'd spent his whole life trying to rise above the assumptions people made about him. Now, all he wanted was to prove that he could be more than just another statistic, more than just another kid who would be forgotten by the system. As the day went on, Malik couldn't shake the thought of the quiz. When he got home, he tried to distract himself, but it was hard. His mother was at work, and his father had passed away when he was just a kid. Malik was used to being alone. Still, he kept thinking about the test, about Ms. Miller's judgment, about the world that had always made him feel small. He couldn't wait to get the results, to either face the validation or the crushing disappointment. That night, he sat at his desk, studying a book he had picked up at the library about advanced calculus. His mind craved knowledge. It was the only thing that made him feel like he had a chance. But even as he tried to focus on the pages in front of him, he couldn't help but wonder what would happen tomorrow. The next morning, as he entered school, Malik's stomach churned with anxiety. He could see Ms. Miller standing by her desk, grading papers, and he knew she was getting to his. His heart raced as he approached her desk to see if she'd graded his quiz yet. "Malik," she said, glancing up from the papers. There was a look in her eyes that he couldn't quite read, something between surprise and skepticism. She handed him his test paper with a stiff smile. Malik took the paper from her, trying to read her face. But it was impossible. He stared down at the sheet in his hands, and his heart skipped a beat. A perfect score. 100%. The words, "Excellent work, Malik," were written at the top in bold, blue ink. Malik's mouth went dry as he looked up at Ms. Miller, who was now watching him intently, as if waiting for his reaction. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Ms. Miller spoke, her voice softer than usual. "Well done, Malik. I didn't expect this." Malik's pulse raced. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He hadn't just passed the test. He had crushed it. But as he looked into Ms. Miller's eyes, he realized that this moment wasn't just about the test score. It was about proving to himself that he wasn't what others expected him to be. It was about breaking free from the stereotypes, from the doubts, from the quiet whispers that always followed him. He had done it. He had proven that he was more than just a kid from the wrong side of town. And this was only the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Malik sat on the worn-out couch in his modest apartment, his eyes scanning the room as the familiar sound of traffic filtered through the thin walls. The apartment was small, tucked away in a neighborhood where kids ran through the streets playing basketball or riding their bikes, the air always thick with the energy of the city. It was a neighborhood that could easily be ignored if you weren't paying attention. But Malik had learned to find the beauty in the small moments, his mother's laugh after a long day at work, the way his little sister would always steal the last piece of his favorite snack. Those small things were what kept him going. He glanced down at the textbook in his lap, a heavy physics book he had borrowed from the library. His fingers lightly grazed the pages, though his mind wandered back to his past. Malik didn't remember much about his father. His dad had passed away when he was only 5 years old, and all the stories about him were either lost or faded with time. What Malik did remember, though, was his mother's quiet strength. She had done everything she could to raise him and his younger sister, Jada, on her own. It wasn't easy. There were days when Malik would come home to find the electricity turned off, or his mother looking exhausted after working multiple jobs to pay the bills. Yet, through it all, she always kept her head high, always told Malik that the world had no limits for him if he worked hard enough. "You're destined for greatness, Malik," she would say, her voice filled with warmth and hope. But the words never seemed to reach the people around him. Not at school. Not in the streets. Malik's classmates only saw him as the kid from the rundown neighborhood. His skin was dark, his clothes often hand-me-downs, and his house was small and cramped compared to the mansions that some of the other students lived in. They assumed things about him before he even had the chance to speak. He wasn't supposed to be smart, let alone a genius. At least, that's how they saw it. At school, Malik often felt invisible. He had a few friends, but even they couldn't understand the constant weight he carried. They didn't know what it felt like to have people look at you and assume you couldn't possibly be good enough. It wasn't their fault, though. They were born into different lives, lives that offered opportunities that Malik could only dream of. His world was one of struggle. It was one where survival sometimes took priority over dreams. Despite it all, Malik never let go of his dreams. He had always been different, his mind worked faster, sharper than most kids his age. He could solve math problems in his head without a calculator, memorize facts in an instant, and his imagination stretched far beyond what his teachers expected. He didn't need fancy schools or tutors to tell him he was smart, his own thoughts told him that every day. But those thoughts were often met with skepticism from the outside world. Teachers doubted his abilities. Classmates joked about his nerdy tendencies. They saw the exterior, the boy with the backpack that looked too old, the jeans that were a little too big, and they didn't look any deeper. His mother always told him not to let the world's judgment define him. "You're more than what they see, Malik," she would remind him each time he came home feeling defeated. "You are the sum of your choices. And you can choose to rise above it all." But even with his mother's unwavering support, Malik couldn't escape the harsh realities of life. His mind was constantly at war with the world around him. At home, he wanted to help out as much as he could, but there wasn't always much to offer. His mother worked long hours, often coming home after dark, her eyes tired but never without a smile for Malik and Jada. Sometimes Malik wished he could do more, give her more. But he knew that his success, whatever form it would take, would have to come from within himself. And so, he studied. He devoured books, not just textbooks, but anything he could get his hands on. He would go to the library after school, sometimes staying until closing time, reading about everything from physics to history, from algebra to astronomy. The knowledge fascinated him, and he was hungry for more. When he couldn't get to the library, he would watch educational videos online or ask his mother to help him get more books from the local store. She always made sure to do what she could, even if it meant cutting back on other things. There was one thing Malik was certain of: he wanted to escape the constraints of his environment. He didn't want to be just another statistic. He wanted to show everyone, including himself, that his background didn't define his future. But there was a constant challenge that Malik faced: the lack of belief others had in him. Not just teachers like Ms. Miller, but the entire education system. The people around him believed in limits. They saw his skin color, his neighborhood, and his family's financial struggles and immediately wrote him off as someone who would never amount to much. Malik knew the score. He knew the world wasn't going to give him a fair shot simply because of where he was born or how he looked. His teachers didn't take him seriously. Every time he answered a question in class, there was a sense of disbelief, almost as if they were surprised he even knew the answer. Ms. Miller, for example, would often glance at him with a skeptical expression when he raised his hand. Even when he gave the correct answer, there was always a faint sense of doubt in her tone. But Malik's response was always the same: he would prove them wrong. At home, Malik's mother would remind him that the world might underestimate him, but that didn't matter. What mattered was how he saw himself. "You are not your circumstances, Malik," she would say. "You are not defined by what people think of you. You have the power to make your own path." And Malik believed her. He believed that if he worked hard enough, studied enough, and remained true to who he was, he could create a future that no one could predict. That was the dream he held on to every day. But today, he wasn't thinking about the future. Today, he was focused on one thing: proving to Ms. Miller, and to everyone else who doubted him, that he was capable of greatness. Today, the test was his opportunity to show the world that Malik, the kid from the poor neighborhood, was capable of achieving more than anyone ever imagined. He stood up, shutting the textbook with a snap. He glanced out the window, watching the last light of the day fade into the evening. Tomorrow was a new day, and tomorrow, he would show them all that he was not just a kid from the wrong side of town, he was a force to be reckoned with. The bell rang, signaling the end of the break, and Malik slowly made his way back to class. He could feel the eyes of his classmates on him, but he kept his head down, trying to ignore the weight of their judgment. Yesterday's test had been a turning point for him. He had scored perfectly, something he wasn't used to, but he knew today would be different. Today, he had to face the consequences of that score. As he entered the classroom, his heart rate quickened. He was acutely aware of the way everyone was looking at him, trying to decipher if he was really the same Malik they had always known. The one who sat in the back, who kept to himself, who didn't attract attention. But now, it was different. Now, he had proven something. Or at least, he thought he had. Malik slid into his usual seat, hoping the world would go back to normal, but deep down, he knew it wouldn't. As he sat there, waiting for class to begin, he could hear whispers. Soft, barely noticeable at first, but they were growing louder, more noticeable. Did you hear? Malik got a perfect score. On the quiz. Wait, seriously? Malik? Yeah, I can't believe it. I always thought he was just one of those quiet kids. Guess he's got something up his sleeve. Malik winced, staring at the desk in front of him, trying to focus on anything but the conversations happening around him. His classmates were whispering, talking behind his back, and he hated it. They didn't know the half of it. They didn't know what it took for him to get that score, the late nights he spent studying when the rest of them were out playing basketball or hanging out with friends. To them, it was just another fluke. Before he could get lost in his thoughts, Ms. Miller walked in. She looked around the room, her gaze lingering on Malik for just a moment too long. She smiled faintly but said nothing as she began setting up the lesson. Malik had always felt like she looked at him differently than the other students. It wasn't necessarily a bad thing, it was more like she didn't know what to make of him. He wasn't the troublemaker or the class clown, but he also wasn't the one with the fancy clothes or a rich family. He was just there. A quiet presence in a room full of loud personalities. When Ms. Miller turned her attention to the board, Malik's eyes drifted to his textbook. His mind wandered back to the test results from yesterday. Perfect score. He couldn't stop thinking about it. But the whispers continued, and Malik couldn't ignore the way they made him feel. It was like everyone was waiting for him to slip up. One mistake, one wrong answer, and they would have the perfect excuse to write him off as just a fluke. That's how they'd always seen him. Not as someone capable, but as someone who didn't belong. Ms. Miller suddenly called his name, snapping him out of his thoughts. Malik, could you come to the board and solve this problem for us? She asked, her voice calm but firm. The room grew silent. Malik's stomach flipped. This wasn't just any problem. It was a complex algebraic expression that most of the class had been struggling with for days. The kind of problem that made even the best students pause. He stood up slowly, feeling the eyes of the entire class on him. The room felt colder, the air thicker, as if everyone was holding their breath. He made his way to the front of the class, chalk in hand, and stared at the board for a moment. He could feel his pulse in his ears. His hands trembled slightly, but he forced himself to focus. He had to show them he wasn't just some random kid who got lucky on a quiz. Taking a deep breath, he began to work through the problem, his mind racing through the steps. The numbers and variables floated in his mind like a puzzle he was putting together piece by piece. As his chalk scratched across the board, he felt the tension in the room grow. Each line he wrote felt like it was marking his place in a battle. He wasn't just solving a problem, he was proving something. Proving to himself that he belonged here. Proving to them that he wasn't a joke. The problem was complicated, but he was determined. Step by step, he broke it down, moving from one part of the equation to the next with precision. The sound of the chalk on the board seemed louder with every movement. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Malik finished the equation and turned to face the class. He was out of breath, and his heart was pounding, but there was no time to reflect. Ms. Miller looked at the board, then back at Malik. There was a brief moment of silence before she spoke. "Well done, Malik. That's correct." But the room didn't erupt in applause. There were no gasps of awe. Instead, Malik saw the looks. The sideways glances, the raised eyebrows. Some of his classmates didn't even seem impressed. They seemed more confused. And that confusion stung more than anything. Jake, sitting near the front of the room, muttered under his breath loud enough for Malik to hear, "That's some next-level fluke right there. He probably just memorized the steps." Malik's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he didn't say anything. He had expected something like this. He had been dealing with comments like that his entire life. People would never give him credit. They wouldn't believe he could be good at something unless they saw it for themselves. And even then, they would question it. Ms. Miller called on another student to solve the next problem, and the classroom settled back into its normal rhythm. But Malik couldn't shake the feeling of doubt creeping in. Was he really doing enough? Was this all just some fleeting moment of luck? Would they always see him as just another kid who didn't belong? As the bell rang and the class ended, Malik gathered his things slowly, trying to avoid the stares. Jake approached him again as he was about to leave. "You did okay," Jake said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But don't get too excited. You've got a long way to go before anyone believes you're actually smart." Malik gritted his teeth, but again, he said nothing. The world could question him all they wanted. He knew the truth. And as long as he believed in himself, that would be enough. But deep down, he felt the weight of the conflict pressing on him. The more he proved his worth, the more others would try to tear him down. He could feel the tension building, could feel the barriers between him and the rest of the world growing stronger. This was just the beginning. The following days were a blur for Malik. He had no idea how he was managing to keep his focus through all the whispers and sideways glances. Despite his efforts to stay under the radar, it was impossible to ignore the growing tension between him and the other students. And yet, he couldn't stop pushing forward. He couldn't afford to let their doubts take hold of him. Ms. Miller had taken note of Malik's recent performance, and though she had praised him in class, it was clear she wasn't fully convinced. There was a flicker of disbelief in her eyes every time he answered a question, as if she were waiting for him to falter. It was like the rest of the world was holding its breath, just waiting for him to make a mistake. And that made him all the more determined not to. But something in Malik had changed. It wasn't just about proving himself anymore. It was about showing the world, and more importantly, showing himself, that he wasn't going to back down. He wasn't going to let anyone define him by his background or his past. He was ready to take control of his own story. That weekend, Malik sat in his bedroom, books scattered around him, studying for the upcoming final exam. He had barely left his room in the last few days, not wanting to face anyone until he had proven that his success wasn't a one-off thing. The test was coming, and this was his chance to show them, show everyone, that he wasn't just some kid who got lucky on a random quiz. He was capable. He reached for his phone to check the time. It was almost midnight. He had been studying for hours, but his mind was still buzzing with the problems he had yet to solve. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he scrolled through his messages, but nothing caught his attention. The silence was overwhelming. Suddenly, his phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced at it, and his stomach dropped. It was a message from his old friend, Tariq. He hadn't heard from him in a while. "Yo, Malik. Just heard about the quiz score. You still think you're too good for us? You think you can really change who you are now?" Malik's chest tightened, and he felt the familiar sting of the words. Tariq had always been the voice of the streets, the one who reminded Malik of where he came from. And that message felt like a punch to the gut. Malik stared at the message for a long time before typing a response. He didn't know if it was worth it to explain himself. But somehow, he had to make it clear that this wasn't just a phase. This wasn't some attempt to escape his roots, it was his future. "I'm just trying to be better, Tariq," he typed back. "I'm not trying to leave anyone behind. But I can't let them decide who I am anymore. I'm doing this for me." He hit send, and for a long time, there was no reply. The emptiness in his chest grew as he sat back against his bed, lost in thought. It wasn't just the school he was fighting, it was everything. The weight of his past, the constant reminders of who he was supposed to be. People who couldn't, or wouldn't, see him as anything other than the kid from the wrong side of town. The next morning, Malik met with Ms. Miller before class. He needed help. He had been doing everything on his own for so long, but this time, he wasn't sure how much further he could push himself without some guidance. "Ms. Miller, can you help me with this?" Malik asked, pointing to a particularly difficult problem in his notebook. Ms. Miller looked up from her desk, surprised. "Of course, Malik. What's bothering you?" I need to make sure I'm ready for the exam. I've been studying, but I feel like I'm missing something." Ms. Miller hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing her options. Then she stood up and walked over to him, looking down at the page. "You're doing well," she said, "but you have to stop doubting yourself. You know the material. You just need to trust in your abilities." Her words hit Malik hard. "You don't understand," he said, shaking his head. "It's not just about the test. It's about everything. They don't believe in me. They think I don't belong here. And every time I succeed, I can see the doubt in their eyes. It's like they're waiting for me to fail." Ms. Miller paused, as though she hadn't expected him to open up like this. Her expression softened. "Malik, I know it's tough. But you have something most of them don't have, determination. You're not just proving something to them. You're proving something to yourself. Don't let them take that away from you." For the first time in a long while, Malik felt a sense of clarity. The journey ahead was going to be hard. He wasn't just up against his classmates, or even Ms. Miller's doubts, he was fighting his own fears. He had spent so long letting other people define him, but now, for the first time, he realized he had the power to change that. Later that afternoon, Malik stood in front of the mirror in his room, staring at his reflection. Who was he, really? The quiet kid who played by the rules, or the one who was capable of more? He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I'm not a fluke," he whispered to his reflection. "I'm not a mistake. I'm not the sum of their expectations." The next day, when the final exam began, Malik felt a sense of calm wash over him. As he sat down in his seat, he focused on the first problem. The classroom was full of anxious energy, but Malik wasn't nervous. This was his chance to show them who he really was. No more hiding. For the first time, he wasn't worried about what anyone else thought. His mind was clear, and the answers came easily. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. He was simply doing what he knew he could do. When the test was over, Malik walked out of the classroom, his head held high. He knew the battle wasn't over. But he had taken a big step toward winning it. And no matter what happened next, he felt ready to face it. The days after the final exam felt like a blur. Malik had worked harder than ever, focusing on his studies with a quiet intensity. The whispers, the stares, everything that had once felt like an unbearable weight now seemed less important. He had faced his doubts head-on, not just from the people around him, but from within himself. And for the first time, he felt a sense of peace, a knowing that he had done all he could. But as the day of the results approached, Malik couldn't shake the nervousness that was starting to build again. He had been so focused on proving himself that the thought of failure still hung over him like a cloud. It was a quiet fear, one he didn't speak about, but it gnawed at him. On the day the grades were posted, Malik entered the classroom like he had every other day. But today was different. There was a palpable tension in the air. Students gathered around the bulletin board, eagerly checking the list of names. Malik's heart pounded as he made his way to the back of the room, keeping his head down. He told himself to breathe, that it didn't matter. But deep down, he knew it did. Ms. Miller was at her desk, a quiet observer to the flurry of activity. Her eyes briefly met Malik's as he passed by, and for a moment, he saw something in her gaze. It was more than just the teacher's usual approval. It was pride. Malik couldn't quite place it, but he didn't have time to think about it now. He stood in front of the board, scanning the list of names. It felt like the room had become a vacuum, as if time itself had slowed down. The names seemed to blur together, but he forced his focus onto the paper in front of him, determined to find his own. His finger traced down the list until it stopped. Malik. A+. He stared at the paper for a long moment, as if waiting for the words to change. His mind raced. Was this real? Had he really done it? It felt like a dream, like he could wake up at any second and find himself back in the world where he wasn't good enough, where his potential had no place. But it wasn't a dream. This was real. Did you see that? Someone whispered behind him. Malik got an A+. Malik didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He could feel the shock ripple through the class. Some students were congratulating him, but their voices felt distant, almost muffled. Their words didn't matter to him in that moment. What mattered was the feeling inside, an overwhelming rush of triumph. He had done it. But as he turned to leave the bulletin board, something strange happened. His chest tightened, and a sudden wave of emotion hit him all at once. It wasn't just pride or relief. It was something deeper. Something more raw. He remembered the long nights spent alone, studying with nothing but his thoughts for company. The countless hours spent doubting himself, wondering if anyone would ever see him for who he truly was. And now, standing here, in this moment of success, it felt like everything, his past, his struggles, the people who had doubted him, had led him to this point. But then, just as quickly, the doubt crept in. Was it enough? The questions began to flood in. What would happen next? Was this just a fluke, like some of his classmates had suggested? Or was he truly capable of more? The weight of these thoughts threatened to drag him down, and for a moment, he wanted to run. To leave. To escape this overwhelming pressure that had built up around him. He took a step back toward the door, trying to steady his breath. Malik, a voice called from behind him. It was Ms. Miller. Malik stopped and turned around, his heart still pounding in his chest. You did it, she said softly, her eyes meeting his with a depth that made him feel understood in a way he hadn't expected. You proved them all wrong. Malik swallowed hard. I didn't do it for them. I did it for me. Ms. Miller nodded, a knowing smile on her face. I know you did. But now, you've shown yourself something too. Malik stood there, unsure of how to respond. The weight of the moment felt almost too much to bear, and yet, he couldn't look away. For a moment, the whole world seemed to pause. The voices around him faded into the background, leaving only the sound of his own heartbeat. And then, he realized something. This wasn't just about the A+ on the paper. It was about everything that had led up to this. The long nights, the sacrifices, the pressure, it was all part of his journey. He wasn't the same Malik who had walked into this school months ago. He was someone new. Someone stronger. Thank you, Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ms. Miller smiled again, and for the first time, Malik saw her not just as a teacher, but as someone who had truly believed in him from the start. You earned it, Malik. Keep going. Don't stop now. And with those words, Malik felt a new sense of clarity wash over him. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Malik's classmates began to see him differently. The whispers of doubt and disbelief slowly faded as more and more people began to recognize his intelligence and his determination. But even as the external pressure seemed to lighten, Malik knew the true battle was far from over. This was only one victory. The real challenge was maintaining this momentum, proving to himself, and to everyone else, that he was more than just a student who got lucky once. He was someone who had earned his place, and he wasn't going to stop now. As the final days of the school year approached, Malik found himself standing at the edge of something he couldn't yet fully understand. But he was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. The emotional weight that had once held him back now felt lighter. He had finally stepped into his own potential. And no one, not even himself, could take that away from him. The final day of school arrived faster than Malik had anticipated. It felt surreal. A year that had started off with so many doubts and fears was now closing with a sense of accomplishment he hadn't thought possible. He had come a long way, not just in terms of grades, but in terms of the person he had become. The weight of his earlier struggles seemed distant now, but the lessons they carried were still fresh in his mind. As he walked through the school halls for the last time that year, Malik reflected on everything that had happened. The uncertainty, the long nights, the fear of failing, it had all been worth it. He had proven something not just to the people around him, but to himself. He could succeed. He could rise above whatever limitations others set for him. But more importantly, he had learned to trust his own abilities. It hadn't been easy, and the road hadn't always been clear. But Malik had done it. He had faced the odds and overcome them in ways he never thought possible. The boy who had once sat quietly in the back of the class, unsure of his worth, was now walking with his head held high. He had earned his place, not because of a single test or one good grade, but because of the strength and resilience he had shown every day. The school year ended with a small ceremony in the gym, and Malik stood among his peers, feeling oddly detached from the world around him. His thoughts were elsewhere, lost in the reflection of everything that had come to pass. The applause, the cheers, it all felt distant. He had already won. He had already proven what he needed to prove. Ms. Miller was the one who called out his name when it was time for awards. He stood up, his heart thumping as he walked toward the stage. Her voice carried with it a sense of pride that resonated deep within him. "Malik, you've shown everyone what it means to never give up," she said, handing him the certificate for academic excellence. "You've shown us that genius isn't just about numbers or formulas. It's about perseverance. It's about pushing through when others expect you to fail." Malik took the certificate from her, his mind swimming with emotions. His classmates were clapping, but Malik couldn't hear them. He didn't need their approval anymore. This moment, this recognition, it was for him. And for once, he felt worthy of it. As he walked back to his seat, a thought echoed in his mind: this was just the beginning. He had done the hard part, but the world outside this classroom still held countless challenges, many of which he couldn't even imagine yet. But Malik was no longer afraid. No matter what came next, he was ready. The summer passed quickly. Malik spent most of it in quiet reflection, pushing himself to grow even further. He spent his time reading, exploring new subjects, and seeking out experiences that would help him continue his journey. He knew the world outside of school was vast, and he wasn't going to limit himself to just what he had learned in class. One day, as he sat on the front porch of his house, the sun setting behind him, Malik received a message from Tariq. It had been weeks since they'd last spoken, and Malik wasn't sure what to expect. But he opened the message anyway. "Yo Malik," the text began, "I gotta admit, I was wrong about you. You really did change. I saw the way you handled things this year. You didn't just survive, you thrived. I respect that." Malik smiled as he read the message. Tariq had always been someone who believed that survival was all that mattered. The world had its own set of rules, and most people couldn't escape it. But Malik had, in his own way. He had found a way to thrive in a world that had constantly tried to box him in. "Thanks, Tariq," Malik typed back. "I'm just getting started." For the first time, Malik didn't feel the need to explain himself. Tariq had seen the change, and that was enough. He didn't need anyone to understand every step of his journey. What mattered was that he understood it. In the weeks that followed, Malik's confidence grew. He spent his days preparing for the next chapter of his life, high school, and beyond. The challenges were far from over, but Malik no longer feared them. He had already faced the most difficult battle of all, believing in himself. One afternoon, he walked into the library, a place he had once found intimidating. The rows upon rows of books had seemed like an overwhelming mountain to climb, but now, they felt like an invitation. There was so much to learn, so much to discover. The world was full of possibilities, and Malik was ready to explore them all. Sitting down at one of the tables, he opened a book on advanced mathematics. It wasn't part of the school curriculum, but he had always been interested in the subject. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew this much: he was no longer content with just getting by. He wanted more. He wanted to push himself further than he ever had before. As he flipped through the pages, a thought struck him. He had proven everyone wrong, yes. But in doing so, he had also proven something even more important, that the greatest obstacle he had ever faced wasn't the judgment of others, but the doubts that lived within him. And now, with those doubts silenced, there was no limit to what he could achieve. Malik looked out the window at the world beyond. It was a world full of challenges, but it was also full of opportunities. He didn't know exactly where his path would lead, but one thing was certain: he wasn't afraid anymore. The months following that pivotal summer were nothing short of transformative for Malik. High school loomed on the horizon, but he didn't approach it with the same sense of fear and insecurity he had once felt. Instead, he stood at the edge of this new chapter with quiet confidence, knowing that he had already faced and conquered the hardest part of his journey, believing in himself. He entered his freshman year with a new perspective, a determination to make the most of every opportunity that came his way. While his peers seemed to carry on as though everything was normal, Malik knew that he had changed. He had become someone different, someone who was no longer content to merely survive, someone who was now ready to thrive. At first, things weren't as easy as he had hoped. High school, as it turned out, had its own set of challenges. It wasn't just the schoolwork. It was the social landscape, the different personalities, and the feeling of being caught between different worlds. Malik had always been quiet, preferring to stay on the sidelines rather than stand out, but now he found himself questioning everything he had once believed about fitting in. The social dynamic was tricky. There were the athletes, the artists, the academic achievers, and then there was Malik, caught somewhere in the middle. At first, it was uncomfortable. He still hadn't fully shaken off the whispers from his old classmates, and in high school, the hierarchy seemed even more defined. But Malik wasn't interested in the cliques anymore. His focus had shifted. This time, it wasn't about fitting in. It was about standing out for the right reasons, because of his ideas, his intelligence, his drive. His first week of high school wasn't easy, but he began to find a rhythm. He started joining study groups and seeking out more advanced courses, pushing himself to grow both academically and personally. For the first time, he wasn't just attending school to survive, he was there to excel. And as he took on more challenging subjects, Malik began to feel a sense of belonging in a way he hadn't anticipated. One day, during a particularly challenging chemistry lesson, Malik found himself sitting at a table with a group of seniors. At first, they seemed intimidating, older, more experienced, but Malik didn't hesitate to speak up when he had an idea. Actually, if you look at the chemical bonds in this equation like this, Malik began, sketching out his thoughts on the whiteboard. The seniors exchanged glances, surprised by how fluidly he navigated the complex topic. Malik's knowledge wasn't just surface level. He had thought through the material deeply, connecting dots in a way that made everyone in the room pause. "Nice one," one of the seniors said, a smile creeping onto his face. "I never thought about it like that." Malik felt a rush of pride, but it was more than that. He wasn't seeking approval anymore. He was simply sharing his knowledge. And that was enough. By the time the first semester was over, Malik had gained a reputation for his intelligence and his relentless work ethic. But it wasn't just the grades that mattered to him anymore. It was the way he approached every challenge. He didn't give up when things got hard. He didn't shrink from opportunities to push himself further. He was determined to be more than just the sum of his test scores. It wasn't long before Malik started receiving recognition for his accomplishments. He was invited to join the prestigious academic decathlon team, a group reserved for the best and brightest students at his school. The team's coach, Ms. Gonzalez, had noticed Malik's potential during one of the study groups he had joined, and she believed he could contribute significantly to their success. "Malik, I've seen your work," Ms. Gonzalez told him after practice one afternoon. "You've got the ability to take this team to the next level. Will you join?" At first, Malik hesitated. It was a big commitment. But then he remembered the lesson he had learned earlier in the year, that he wasn't going to let his fear or self-doubt hold him back. So, with a deep breath, he accepted. Joining the academic decathlon was a turning point for Malik. It pushed him to new heights, testing his abilities and his limits in ways he hadn't anticipated. The competition was fierce, and the pressure was intense, but Malik thrived in the challenge. The more he immersed himself in the rigorous preparation, the more confident he became in his abilities. The team had its ups and downs, but Malik's presence in their study sessions brought a new energy to the group. He was no longer just the quiet kid in the back of the room. He was a leader, someone who had earned his place through hard work and determination. And as the competition drew closer, he found himself surrounded by a group of people who respected him for his intellect and his tenacity. As the day of the academic decathlon arrived, Malik stood at the edge of the stage, waiting for his turn to answer the next round of questions. The gymnasium was packed with students from all over the district, the tension thick in the air. But Malik wasn't nervous. He had been here before, this was just another challenge, and he was ready. When the announcer called his name, Malik walked to the microphone, feeling the weight of the moment. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him, but it didn't faze him. This was his moment to prove that he had what it took. Not just to his classmates, but to himself. The first question came, and Malik answered it with ease. The second, third, and fourth questions followed, and each time, Malik's response was clear and concise. He was in his element, and nothing could shake his focus. When the final results were announced, the team had won first place. It was a victory that felt sweeter than any award or recognition Malik had received before. It wasn't just about the accolades, it was about knowing that he had pushed through every barrier, every doubt, and come out on top. As his teammates celebrated around him, Malik couldn't help but smile. He had come so far. The boy who had once been afraid to speak up, who had hidden in the shadows, was now standing in the spotlight, not because of luck, but because of the work he had put in. In that moment, Malik understood something crucial: the journey wasn't about proving other people wrong anymore. It was about proving to himself that he could overcome any obstacle that came his way. He had changed his own narrative, and no one could take that from him. And as he looked out at the cheering crowd, Malik realized that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges, more obstacles to overcome, but he was ready. He had already proven to himself that he could face anything. And that, he realized, was the greatest victory of all. The victory at the academic decathlon marked the beginning of a new chapter for Malik. But with that success came an undeniable truth: the higher you rise, the greater the challenges you face. Malik had stepped into the spotlight, but now he was beginning to feel the weight of that spotlight, both the praise and the pressure. As the new semester began, Malik found himself under increasing scrutiny. His teachers held him to a higher standard, his peers watched his every move, and the pressure to succeed became almost suffocating at times. At first, it was exhilarating. He had always craved recognition, even though he had never fully embraced it. But now, with all eyes on him, he started to feel the anxiety creep in. What if he failed? What if this success was just a fluke? It was during a quiet evening, sitting in his room, that Malik first acknowledged the weight of his own expectations. The noise of the world outside, the praise, the recognition, the constant comparisons, felt distant. His mind had been racing for hours, torn between his desire to keep pushing forward and the nagging fear that somehow, all of this could unravel. He wasn't used to the feeling of pressure. In the past, he had always been the underdog, the one no one expected much from. But now, people were looking to him for answers, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if he had them. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on his door. It was his mom, her face soft with concern. "Malik, you okay?" she asked, sitting down beside him. He nodded, though his mind was far from settled. "Yeah, just thinking a lot." She raised an eyebrow. "Thinking about what?" Malik hesitated, unsure of how to articulate what he was feeling. "I feel like I'm always on the edge of something. Like I've proven I can do it, but what if I can't keep it up?" His mom smiled gently, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Malik, you've already proven that you can. But you don't have to do it all alone. You're not a robot. It's okay to not always have the answers. It's okay to have moments of doubt. What matters is how you handle them when they come." Her words sank in slowly, offering him a quiet reassurance. His mom had always been his anchor, and hearing her speak with such confidence made him realize that he didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders alone. He had people in his corner. The next day at school, Malik's thoughts still swirled, but he carried with him a renewed sense of perspective. His mind was clearer, his anxiety a little less consuming. But the pressure was still there. It was undeniable. In one of his advanced math classes, Malik found himself struggling with a particularly challenging problem. He had always been good at math, brilliant, even, but this problem had him stumped. He stared at the equation on the board, his mind scrambling for a solution that seemed just out of reach. Ms. Gonzalez, who had been observing his growing confidence in the classroom, noticed his struggle. She walked over to Malik's desk, her eyes scanning the problem on the board. "Malik," she said, her voice calm but firm. "What's going on?" Malik sighed, frustrated. I can't solve this. I thought I understood it, but now it doesn't make sense." Ms. Gonzalez looked at him for a moment, as if seeing through his frustration. "You know, Malik, this is how real growth happens. It's not about getting every answer right immediately. It's about struggling and persevering when you hit a wall. This problem is tough for everyone. But the fact that you're here, working through it, means you're learning more than just the solution. You're learning how to fail and get back up. And that's a skill you'll need for the rest of your life." Her words stuck with him long after the class ended. For so long, Malik had been obsessed with being perfect, getting every answer right, never failing. But Ms. Gonzalez's reminder hit him hard. The real challenge wasn't about being flawless. It was about how he responded when things didn't go according to plan. That evening, as he worked through the math problem again at home, Malik found himself embracing the struggle rather than resenting it. He knew the answer was there somewhere. It was just a matter of working through the process, step by step, without giving up. It took hours, but eventually, he cracked it. The sense of relief was immense, but it was different this time. It wasn't just the satisfaction of solving a problem. It was the understanding that the process itself, struggling, failing, and pushing through, was where the real growth happened. Over the next few weeks, Malik continued to face new challenges, both in and out of the classroom. The pressure didn't lessen, but his mindset began to shift. He started to see failure as a part of the journey, not as something to be feared. He began to see each setback not as evidence of his inadequacy, but as a chance to learn and improve. He also found himself helping others in ways he hadn't expected. His friends, some of whom had once been critical of him, started seeking out his help with their schoolwork. At first, Malik had been hesitant, unsure of how to help others when he was still figuring things out for himself. But as he tutored his friends, he realized that teaching them wasn't just about explaining concepts, it was about understanding them at a deeper level. It helped him to reinforce what he had already learned and challenge his own thinking. One afternoon, as Malik was helping a classmate with a complicated history assignment, his friend turned to him, surprised. "You know, Malik, I never thought of you as the type to be this smart. But now, it's like I'm seeing a whole different side of you." Malik smiled, not with arrogance but with quiet pride. "Yeah, I guess I've changed a lot. But it's not about proving people wrong. It's about proving to myself that I can do it." His friend nodded thoughtfully. "Well, you've definitely proven that." Malik's journey had come full circle. He had gone from doubting his own potential to embracing every challenge that came his way. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments of self-doubt, but he had learned one of the most important lessons of all: growth comes from within. The external pressure, the expectations of others, none of it mattered if he didn't first believe in himself. And with that, Malik finally understood. The greatest challenge he had faced wasn't overcoming the doubts of others, it was overcoming his own fears, his own limitations. And as he looked toward the future, he knew one thing for sure: he was ready for whatever came next. By the time spring rolled around, Malik had settled into a rhythm that felt natural. He had built meaningful relationships with his classmates and teachers, and his academic success was steadily improving. But even though things seemed to be moving in the right direction, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking on the horizon, something that would push him further than he'd ever been pushed before. Malik's unease became more pronounced when he received an unexpected letter one afternoon. It was a thick envelope with the school's emblem stamped on it. He tore it open, not sure what to expect, but the moment he read the words "National Honor Society Invitation," his stomach dropped. The National Honor Society, NHS, was one of the most prestigious organizations in the school, reserved for the top-performing students who exhibited leadership, character, and academic excellence. To be invited was a huge honor, a recognition of all the hard work he had put in over the past year. But it also came with an intense commitment: meetings, volunteer work, leadership duties, and, most importantly, a pressure to maintain perfection. Malik had always been the type to work hard for what he wanted, but the weight of the NHS title seemed daunting. As he read through the responsibilities outlined in the letter, his initial excitement was quickly replaced with apprehension. Was he ready for this? What if he couldn't handle the pressure? Would he still have time for his other activities, like the academic decathlon team? A week later, after some careful thought, Malik decided to accept the invitation. He knew this was an opportunity that could open doors for his future, but he also knew it would require him to step up in ways he hadn't anticipated. The first NHS meeting was held in the school's library, and as Malik walked into the room, he felt a mix of pride and anxiety. The students there were the best of the best, top athletes, academic prodigies, and student leaders. As they all sat in their neatly pressed uniforms, exchanging stories of their extracurricular activities, Malik couldn't help but feel like he didn't quite belong. He was an outsider in this world of elite students. Everyone else seemed so confident, so sure of their place in the school's social fabric. When the meeting began, Ms. Harris, the NHS advisor, stood at the front of the room. She was an imposing figure, known for her no-nonsense attitude, but she was also respected for her commitment to the students. "Welcome, all of you," Ms. Harris said with a voice that commanded attention. "You have been chosen for the National Honor Society because you embody the values of scholarship, leadership, service, and character. But with that honor comes great responsibility. Your academic achievements will continue to be important, but we will also be looking to you to lead by example. Malik listened intently as she outlined the commitments required from NHS members. It wasn't just about excelling in school, they were expected to give back to the community through volunteer work, organize fundraising events, and mentor younger students. There would be meetings, projects, and constant evaluation. The pressure to maintain their standards was constant. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Malik found himself juggling his coursework, the academic decathlon preparations, and NHS duties. Every moment felt consumed by responsibilities, and despite his best efforts, the stress began to take its toll. It was during a particularly grueling week of assignments and NHS projects that Malik hit a wall. He had barely slept in days, and his mind was frazzled. He had a major chemistry test coming up, and he hadn't even started studying for it. To make matters worse, his NHS group had a meeting that same afternoon, and they were supposed to present a community service project. Sitting in the library, trying to get through a pile of notes, Malik felt himself unraveling. He had always been able to manage his time effectively, but now everything seemed to be slipping through his fingers. His brain felt foggy, and no matter how hard he tried to focus, he couldn't shake the feeling of overwhelm. As he stared at his chemistry textbook, trying to make sense of the formulas on the page, a voice pulled him out of his thoughts. "Malik, are you okay?" It was his friend, Derek, from the academic decathlon team. Derek had noticed Malik's stress and had come over to check on him. Malik sighed, closing the book in front of him. "I don't know, man. I'm struggling. There's just so much to do, and I'm feeling like I can't keep up." Derek nodded sympathetically, sitting down next to him. "I get it. I've been there. But you've got this. I know you do. You're one of the smartest people I know." Malik smiled faintly, but the weight of everything still pressed down on him. "It's not just about being smart, though. It's about handling all this. I can't keep pretending like I've got it all figured out." Derek gave him a look of understanding. "The thing is, no one has it all figured out. We all have moments like this, Malik. But you've got to remember that you don't have to do it alone. You've got a team, whether it's us in decathlon or your family and friends. Don't be afraid to lean on us when you need it." Malik felt a sense of relief wash over him. For so long, he had been carrying the weight of his success on his own shoulders, trying to prove that he could do everything himself. But Derek's words reminded him that even the most successful people had their support systems. He wasn't alone in this. By the time the chemistry test came around, Malik felt more prepared, not because he had mastered every concept, but because he had learned to balance his commitments and rely on others for support. He took a deep breath as he entered the test room, remembering what Derek had said. He wasn't alone, and he didn't have to be perfect. The test was challenging, but Malik did his best, and when it was over, he felt a weight lifted off his chest. The pressure wasn't gone completely, but he had learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes the hardest part of a challenge wasn't the work itself, but learning to manage the pressure and finding balance. When the results of the test were posted a few days later, Malik was pleasantly surprised. He hadn't gotten a perfect score, but he had passed with a solid grade, enough to keep his GPA intact. It wasn't a victory to boast about, but it felt like a personal win. He had faced the pressure, found his footing, and kept moving forward. As he walked out of the school that day, Malik couldn't help but smile. He had a long road ahead of him, but he was no longer afraid of the challenges that came his way. With each step, he was proving to himself that he was capable of handling whatever life threw at him. And for the first time in a long while, he realized that the real test wasn't about academic success or social approval, it was about finding the strength to face your fears and rise above them, no matter how heavy the weight might feel. Spring break came and went, and as the end of the school year approached, Malik found himself caught in a whirlwind of deadlines, projects, and final exams. The National Honor Society, his decathlon training, and his ever-growing list of commitments had kept him busier than ever, and although he was still performing at the top of his class, the exhaustion was starting to take its toll. As much as Malik loved his academic life, there were moments when it felt like he was teetering on the edge of burnout. He was constantly tired, running on little more than determination and caffeine. But despite the challenges, he remained driven. He couldn't afford to slow down, not now, not with everything he had worked for hanging in the balance. But just when Malik thought he had everything under control, something happened that he never saw coming, a situation that would test him in ways he never imagined. It began on a normal Thursday afternoon, the kind of day that felt like any other. Malik had just finished a practice session for the academic decathlon team when he received an unexpected message from his mom. "Malik, I need you to come home right now. It's your dad. There's been an accident." The message left him paralyzed for a moment, his heart dropping into his stomach. His mind raced, unable to comprehend the words he had just read. His father? An accident? Malik immediately grabbed his bag, not bothering to finish his conversation with his coach or his teammates. His hands trembled as he fumbled with his phone, dialing his mom's number, but the line went straight to voicemail. Panic set in as Malik rushed out of the school building, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. His father, a steady and hard-working man, had always been his rock. The thought of something happening to him was too much to bear. When Malik finally arrived home, he found his mother in the living room, her face pale and tight with worry. She rushed to him, pulling him into a tight hug as soon as he walked through the door. "Mom, what's going on?" Malik asked, his voice strained. "He's at the hospital, Malik," his mom said, her voice breaking. "There was a car accident. The doctors are doing everything they can, but it's serious." The words hit Malik like a punch to the gut. He tried to hold it together, but the world felt like it was slipping out from under him. His father, who had always been the one to teach him how to navigate life, who had been his role model, was now fighting for his life, and Malik was powerless to help him. After what felt like hours, Malik and his mom finally made their way to the hospital. The waiting room was filled with families, all anxiously awaiting news of their loved ones, but Malik barely noticed them. His eyes were locked on the double doors leading to the emergency room, his heart pounding with every second that passed. When the doctor finally appeared, his face was somber. "Malik, we've done everything we can. Your father is stable for now, but the next 24 hours are critical. We need to see how he responds, but I won't lie to you, his injuries are severe." Malik's world tilted. His mind was in a haze, processing the information, but it didn't feel real. His father, the man who had always been strong, was now lying unconscious in a hospital bed, clinging to life. "Can I see him?" Malik asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The doctor nodded, and Malik was led to his father's room. The sight of him lying there, hooked up to machines and covered in bandages, nearly broke him. His father looked so small, so vulnerable. This wasn't the man who had always been his pillar of strength. This was someone who needed him, someone who needed hope. Malik sat beside the bed, holding his father's hand, trying to push the flood of emotions aside. He didn't know what to say. Words seemed too small, too insignificant in the face of such an overwhelming situation. But as he sat there, a thought began to form in his mind. He had spent so much of his life focused on proving himself academically, on achieving perfection, on rising above the challenges he faced. But now, facing the most difficult challenge of his life, he realized that some things were more important than grades, more important than accolades. What mattered most was the people in his life, the ones who had always been there for him, who had shown him the true meaning of strength and resilience. "Dad, I need you to get through this," Malik whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know what I'm going to do without you. But I need you to keep fighting." As the hours dragged on, Malik remained by his father's side, refusing to leave, even when the doctors recommended taking a break. The waiting felt unbearable, but Malik knew that he had to hold it together, for his father, for his family. The next day, there was a small shift in his father's condition. The doctors reported that he had shown signs of improvement, though he was still in critical condition. The relief Malik felt was immense, though the uncertainty lingered. His father wasn't out of the woods yet, but at least now there was hope. For the next few days, Malik's life became a blur of hospital visits and late nights spent in prayer, hoping and wishing for his father's recovery. As he navigated this uncharted territory, he realized something that changed the course of his life forever: his academic achievements, his goals, his ambitions. They were important, yes. But they didn't define him. What defined him was his ability to endure, to support his loved ones, and to rise above the challenges that life presented. Malik's life had always been about proving his worth to others, about showing the world what he was capable of. But now, with his father's health in the balance, he understood that true strength wasn't about success or accolades. It was about love, perseverance, and the unwavering support of those who cared for you. As the days passed, Malik's father continued to improve, slowly but steadily. The road to recovery was long, but Malik found himself more focused on being there for his family than anything else. He didn't know what the future held, whether he would return to his studies or if he would have to put everything on hold, but he did know that he would always find a way to rise above, just like his father had always taught him. And as the seasons changed, Malik discovered that even in the most unexpected of trials, there was always room for growth, both as a student and as a person. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Malik sat beside his father's hospital bed each day, watching him as he slept. The steady beep of the heart monitor was a constant reminder of how fragile life was. The doctors said it was a good sign that his father was showing small improvements every day, but Malik knew that the road to recovery would be long and uncertain. His dad wasn't just recovering from physical injuries, he was fighting to regain a sense of normalcy, and so was Malik. For the first time in a long while, Malik found himself torn between his responsibilities. The world outside the hospital seemed like it was moving at lightning speed. His friends were all pushing forward with their final exams, and his duties with the National Honor Society were piling up. He had neglected most of his schoolwork during his father's hospital stay, and now, as the end of the semester loomed, the weight of the work he had to catch up on pressed heavily on him. It was overwhelming. He had always prided himself on being able to juggle everything, but this felt different. The balancing act had suddenly become impossible. Malik wasn't sure if he could keep up with the intense pace of schoolwork while also staying at the hospital to be with his father. One morning, as he sat next to his father's bed, his mother entered the room. She had a tired but hopeful look on her face, as if she too had come to terms with how much their lives had changed in the past few weeks. "Malik," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You need to take care of yourself too. You've been here for days, but you can't neglect your own future. Your dad would want you to stay focused." Malik looked up at her, his eyes filled with exhaustion. "I know, Mom. But I don't know if I can handle everything. It feels like everything is falling apart." His mother sat beside him, taking his hand. "Malik, your dad is going to make it. He's strong, and he's a fighter. But you also need to fight for yourself. You've been through a lot, and it's okay to lean on others. You're not alone in this." Malik nodded, taking in her words. His mom was right. He had been trying to handle everything alone, trying to keep his academic life intact, trying to be there for his family, trying to prove that he could do it all. But now, it was clear that he couldn't do everything alone. The next morning, after a restless night, Malik decided to take his mother's advice. He took a deep breath, picked up his phone, and started texting his classmates and friends. He needed help. He reached out to Derek first, who had always been a solid friend. Malik explained the situation and asked if he could catch up with him on the latest assignments. Derek responded almost immediately. "Of course, Malik. Don't worry about it. We'll work together and get you back on track." Focus on your dad. We've got this covered. The relief that flooded Malik was instantaneous. For the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel like he was drowning. Derek wasn't the only one to step up. His classmates, especially the ones in the National Honor Society, offered to take on more of the work for the upcoming volunteer events and projects. Malik's teachers also understood the difficult situation he was in, offering extensions on assignments and helping him with some of the coursework he had fallen behind in. Malik was overwhelmed with gratitude. He had always thought that asking for help was a sign of weakness, but now he realized that it was okay to rely on others, especially when you were facing challenges bigger than yourself. As the days passed, Malik divided his time between studying for his finals and being by his father's side. His dad had started to show more signs of improvement, and each day, Malik saw small victories. His father's grip was a little stronger, and he was beginning to open his eyes more often. Though he couldn't speak yet, it was a sign that he was starting to regain consciousness. Every evening, Malik would return home to review his notes, catching up on everything he had missed during his absence. It wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect. But each day, Malik took one step forward. One page at a time. Eventually, his father's recovery began to move faster than anyone expected. Within 2 weeks, his father was stable enough to leave the intensive care unit and move to a regular hospital room. It was a huge relief for Malik, who now had the chance to breathe a little easier. He knew the worst was behind them. But even as his father continued to improve, Malik still had a mountain of work ahead of him. Finals were just around the corner, and Malik hadn't been able to give his studies the attention they needed. But now, with a clearer head and the support of his friends, he knew he could do it. One evening, as Malik sat at the hospital with his dad, his father opened his eyes and looked at him. His father's voice was weak, but still strong with determination. "I'm proud of you, son," his dad said hoarsely. "You've been strong. Keep pushing forward. You've got a lot ahead of you." Malik's heart swelled with emotion. He had always looked up to his father, but now he realized just how much his father's words meant. In that moment, he understood what true strength was. It wasn't about succeeding in every area of life. It wasn't about maintaining perfection. It was about resilience. It was about fighting for what mattered, no matter the odds. "I'll keep going, Dad," Malik replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll make sure you don't have to worry about me. I'm going to be okay." And for the first time in weeks, Malik allowed himself to believe it. He would be okay. His father was going to be okay. And together, they would get through this. With his father's recovery on the rise, Malik found himself feeling more balanced, even though the storm of responsibilities still loomed overhead. Finals were just days away, and Malik's teachers were patient, giving him extensions where needed. But the pressure of catching up, combined with the ongoing recovery of his father, still weighed heavily on him. As his dad continued to show signs of improvement, Malik knew it was time to start focusing on his future again. He couldn't let his life stall any longer, no matter how personal the challenges had become. But there was an overwhelming feeling of guilt that tugged at him every time he considered leaving his father's side for too long. How could he step away when his father still needed him? Malik's mother sensed this inner turmoil, and one evening, as they sat quietly together in the hospital room, she spoke the words that had been lingering in both of their minds. "Malik, I know it's been hard for you," she began, her voice gentle. "But your father is recovering. He's going to need time, and so will we. But you also need to take care of yourself. It's time to focus on your future." Malik looked down at his hands. He didn't want to admit it, but he was afraid. Afraid of leaving his dad behind in a moment of vulnerability. He had spent so much of his life building his academic future. Was he ready to step back into that world while everything else was still in flux? "I don't know, Mom," Malik finally admitted. "I've been feeling like if I let go, even for a minute, everything will fall apart." His mother squeezed his hand. You've been holding everything together for a long time. But you've also built an amazing support system. Your friends, your teachers, and yes, even me, your dad would want you to be the best version of yourself. And that means continuing to grow, even when times are hard. Her words resonated with him, but Malik was still uncertain. He had never been good at leaving things unfinished, and his father's condition still felt like an unfinished story in his heart. However, he knew his mother was right. His father wouldn't want him to sacrifice everything for the sake of one moment. Malik had to finish what he had started. The next day, after visiting his father, Malik made a decision. He was going to return to school. He had missed too much, and he knew the only way to continue moving forward was to dive back into his studies. But it wasn't going to be easy. As Malik walked into his classroom the following Monday, he could feel the stares of his classmates. They knew what had happened, and the sympathy in their eyes was palpable. Malik wasn't sure how to feel about that. He didn't want pity. He didn't want people to feel sorry for him. He just wanted to finish what he had started. His math teacher, Mrs. Jenkins, was the first to approach him after class. "Malik," she said warmly, "we're all so glad to see you back. You've been through a lot, but I have no doubt you'll catch up in no time." "Thanks, Mrs. Jenkins," Malik replied, grateful for her understanding. But it wasn't just his teachers that made him feel welcome again, it was his friends. Derek, Jessica, and the rest of the decathlon team had been holding the fort down while he had been away, and now, they were ready to help him catch up. They pulled together study sessions, made sure he had all the notes from missed classes, and even met up with him after school to review the material. It was clear that Malik wasn't in this alone anymore. Malik's academic world had felt like a tightrope for so long, but now, it seemed like there was some solid ground underneath him. It was still going to be a challenge, there was no doubt about that, but at least he wasn't carrying the weight of it all by himself. As Malik pored over his textbooks that evening, studying until his eyes burned, he kept thinking about what his mom had said, "It's time to focus on your future." The words rang in his ears, reminding him that his journey wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. By the time finals rolled around, Malik felt prepared. He wasn't sure if he'd ace every exam, but he knew he had given it his all. And that was enough. No matter what happened, Malik had learned something invaluable over the past few weeks. The true measure of his strength wasn't about how perfect his grades were or how much he could accomplish alone. It was about his ability to push forward, to rise in the face of adversity, and to lean on others when necessary. The night before his last exam, Malik sat by his father's bedside. His dad had been slowly regaining more energy, though he was still far from being back to his old self. But even in his weakened state, his father's eyes were filled with pride. "You're going to do great, Malik," his dad said, his voice still raspy from the tubes and machines. "You've already shown so much strength. I'm proud of you." Tears welled up in Malik's eyes as he held his father's hand. He had always wanted to make his dad proud, but in that moment, he realized he had already done so. He had proven that he could face life's challenges head-on, no matter the obstacles in his path. "I'm going to give it everything I've got, Dad," Malik replied, his voice filled with determination. "And I'm going to make you proud." The next day, Malik took his finals with a clear mind and a steady heart. It wasn't just about grades anymore, it was about showing up, doing his best, and embracing the journey ahead. Whether he got the top score or just passed, Malik knew he had already proven something far more important, that he was capable of rising to any challenge life threw his way. As the school year came to an end, Malik found himself in a new place, one of quiet confidence. He had overcome the hardest months of his life, and he had done so with resilience, grit, and the unwavering support of his family and friends. And as he looked toward the future, Malik realized that he was ready for whatever came next. The school year was finally over. Malik sat on his front porch, the warm breeze of early summer swirling around him, trying to process everything that had happened in the past few months. His father's recovery was progressing steadily, his grades were better than he had hoped for under the circumstances, and his friends had stuck by him every step of the way. It felt like the weight of the world had been lifted, but he knew the journey wasn't over yet. Summer was usually a time for relaxation, but for Malik, it became a time for reflection. He had learned a lot about himself over the past several months, and it wasn't just the lessons from school or books. He had learned about resilience, about asking for help, and most importantly, about how to balance his own needs with the needs of the people he loved. Malik's phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Jessica. "Hey, are you up for a study group at my place tomorrow? We can go over the summer reading list and hang out afterward." Malik smiled at the text. Even though finals were behind him, his friends had insisted on staying connected over the summer to prepare for the next school year. Derek and Jessica, as well as a few other members of the decathlon team, had made it clear they weren't going to let him slip behind again. Malik appreciated that. It felt good to know that no matter what came next, he wouldn't be going through it alone. But Malik wasn't only focused on school. The summer offered a chance to reconnect with his passions outside of academics. He had always loved music and playing the piano, a hobby that had taken a back seat during the stressful months leading up to finals and his father's accident. Now, with more time on his hands, Malik found himself retreating to the piano more often, letting the soothing sound of the keys fill the quiet spaces in his mind. One afternoon, while he was playing a piece he had started months ago, Malik's dad walked into the room. Though he still had a slight limp and his movements were slower than they used to be, his dad's smile was wide and full of warmth. "You're getting better at that," his dad said, sitting down in the chair next to him. "I remember when you first started playing, it was all over the place." Malik chuckled, remembering how much his dad had supported his interest in music. "Yeah, well, I had to practice a lot to get here. It helps me clear my mind." "I can tell," his dad said with a nod. "You've come a long way, son. I'm proud of you." Malik's chest tightened with emotion. It had been a long road, one that had been filled with moments of uncertainty, fear, and stress. But now, sitting in the quiet of the afternoon with his father recovering, he finally felt like things were slowly falling back into place. "I've been thinking a lot," Malik began, stopping mid-song. "About everything that happened. I don't want to forget what I've learned. I don't want to go back to just being Malik the student. I want to be more than that." His father looked at him, his gaze steady and thoughtful. "You already are, Malik. You've been through more than most people your age. But that doesn't mean you stop growing. Life is about constantly learning, about yourself, the people around you, and what matters most. Just keep moving forward, son. You're on the right path." Malik nodded, the weight of his father's words sinking in. He was on the right path, not because everything was easy, but because he had kept moving through the hardest moments. He realized that the hardest challenges often lead to the greatest opportunities for growth. And as he looked at his dad, he knew that, for the first time in a long while, they were both going to be okay. The summer passed by in a blur of study sessions, piano practice, and spending time with his family and friends. Malik kept his focus on his recovery, both his own and his father's. They spent weekends at the park, enjoying quiet moments and finding comfort in the mundane. Sometimes, Malik would bring his textbooks to the park and study while his father watched the birds in the trees or listened to the sounds of children playing nearby. It was a reminder of how important it was to stay grounded in the present, even as he prepared for the future. As August neared, Malik found himself ready to start his senior year of high school. There was still a part of him that was nervous about what the future held. The college applications were looming, and the pressure to excel was growing. But this time, Malik felt differently. He wasn't carrying all the burdens alone. His friends, his family, and even his teachers had shown him what true support meant. The day before the first day of school, Malik sat on his porch again, watching the sun set in the sky. The world felt peaceful, almost surreal. It had been months since that fateful day when his life had been turned upside down, but now, everything seemed to be falling back into place. There was a sense of calm, a quiet confidence that had settled in his heart. Tomorrow is a new day, Malik whispered to himself, his heart full of hope. The storm had passed, and now it was time for the calm. As he stood up and went inside, Malik felt ready for whatever the future held. He wasn't just Malik the student or Malik the son of a recovering father. He was someone who had overcome immense obstacles, who had learned the true meaning of strength and resilience. And with that knowledge, he knew he was ready to tackle whatever challenges the next chapter of his life would bring. The first day of senior year arrived with a wave of excitement and nervous energy that swept through Malik's entire being. He'd spent the summer rebuilding himself, finding balance between his academics, his family life, and his passions, and now it was time to put everything he'd learned into practice. He'd navigated the most difficult months of his life, and now, he was ready to face whatever came next. As Malik walked through the halls of his high school that morning, it felt almost surreal. He hadn't been in these hallways for nearly a month, and yet, everything seemed familiar yet different at the same time. His friends were already congregating near the lockers, chatting and laughing about their summer adventures. The chatter of excitement buzzed in the air as the new school year began. Jessica was the first to spot Malik. She waved him over with a big grin. "Hey, Malik. How's your dad? How's everything going?" Malik smiled, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders as he responded. "He's doing a lot better, thanks. It's been a slow road, but he's getting there." "That's so good to hear," Jessica said, giving him a supportive pat on the back. "You've been through so much, man. I'm really proud of you." Before Malik could respond, Derek appeared beside them, his usual carefree attitude radiating from him. "Look at you, back and ready to conquer the world, huh? You know, we've all been holding the fort down, but it's good to have you back." Malik laughed. "I wouldn't have made it through without you guys. Seriously, you don't know how much it means to me." Derek smirked. "We just want to make sure you don't get ahead of us. You're not allowed to be the smartest kid in school without us helping you keep up." The friendly banter between Malik, Derek, and Jessica was a welcome relief. It reminded him that, even though life had changed dramatically over the past few months, the core of his friendships had stayed the same. They were there for him, ready to support him in every way possible. As Malik made his way to his first class, he felt a sense of purpose that had been missing for a while. It wasn't just about grades anymore. It wasn't about pleasing his teachers or his peers. It was about living life authentically and with intention, about learning not only from textbooks but from experiences and relationships. The bell rang, signaling the start of the school day, and Malik entered his first class, Advanced Physics. He was eager to see how things would unfold this year, especially in a subject that had always intrigued him. Mrs. Anderson, the physics teacher, was standing at the front of the room, organizing papers. As she looked up, her eyes met Malik's, and she smiled. "Malik, it's good to see you back. We missed you in class." Malik's heart warmed. He had always appreciated Mrs. Anderson's approach to teaching. She wasn't just a teacher, she was someone who genuinely cared about her students and their growth. "I'm happy to be back, Mrs. Anderson," Malik replied. As the class began, Malik found himself completely immersed in the lesson. It felt good to be surrounded by the familiar hum of intellectual challenge. The problems on the whiteboard seemed less like obstacles and more like opportunities. This was his element. By the time lunch rolled around, Malik had already checked off several tasks from his mental to-do list. His teachers had been welcoming and understanding, his friends had made him feel at ease, and the subjects he had once struggled with felt more manageable than ever. It was a new chapter, one that was grounded in the lessons he'd learned over the last several months. At lunch, Malik joined his friends at their usual table. Derek was already in the middle of a conversation about the upcoming science fair, while Jessica was eagerly talking about the college applications she was starting to fill out. Malik felt an unfamiliar sense of calm as they discussed their plans for the future. For so long, he had been consumed by the fear of what might happen next, but now, he realized that the future wasn't something to fear. It was something to look forward to. "So, Malik," Derek asked, glancing at him. "What's next for you? You've got your senior year ahead of you, what are you thinking about for college?" Malik took a moment before answering. It was a question he had been asking himself for a while, especially after everything that had happened with his dad. He had always dreamed of going to a prestigious university, but now, the dream didn't feel like a far-off fantasy. It felt real. The strength he had discovered within himself had opened new possibilities. "I'm thinking about applying to MIT," Malik said, his voice steady. "I've been doing a lot of research into their programs, especially in engineering and physics. It just feels like the right place for me." Jessica's eyes widened in surprise. "MIT? That's amazing. You're going to crush it." Malik shrugged, trying to play it cool. "I don't know about crushing it, but I'm going to give it everything I've got." The conversation turned to their other friends, and Malik found himself thinking about how much had changed in the last few months. He'd grown, not just as a student, but as a person. He had faced some of life's toughest challenges, and though the scars were still there, they didn't define him. He was stronger now. And more determined. As the school day came to a close, Malik walked to his locker, reflecting on how far he had come. He was no longer just the student who excelled in academics or the son who had to hold everything together. He was someone who had learned to ask for help, to lean on his support system, and to take things one step at a time. When he arrived home later that evening, his father was sitting in the living room, reading a book. Malik sat beside him, a smile creeping onto his face. "How was your first day back?" his dad asked, glancing up from his book. "It was good. I feel like I'm finally back in the game. Things are starting to make sense again." His father smiled warmly, his eyes filled with pride. "I'm glad to hear that, son. You've worked hard for this, and I know you'll do great things. Just remember to keep going forward. One step at a time." Malik leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of his father's words. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but now, Malik was ready. He had learned the true meaning of strength and resilience, and with that knowledge, there was no challenge he couldn't face. The weeks passed quickly as Malik settled back into the rhythm of school. The challenges of senior year were mounting: AP classes, extracurricular activities, and, of course, the looming weight of college applications. But despite the pressure, Malik felt different. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. It was late September when Malik's teachers began encouraging their students to start thinking about their college essays. He sat in English class, listening as Mrs. Carter spoke about how the personal essay could make or break an application. Your personal statement is your chance to show who you really are. It's not just about your grades or your accomplishments, it's about the person behind the resume, Mrs. Carter explained, her voice firm but encouraging. Malik had always excelled in school, but the idea of distilling his entire story into one essay was intimidating. How could he possibly sum up everything he'd experienced in a few short paragraphs? The death of his mother, his father's accident, the crushing weight of responsibility, and finally, his own personal transformation, it all seemed too much to cram into something as simple as a college essay. Jessica leaned over to him, noticing the troubled look on Malik's face. "You good? You seem a little off." Malik exhaled slowly. "It's just the personal statement. I don't know how to tell my story. It feels like there's so much more to it, you know. But I don't know how to make it all fit." Jessica smiled knowingly. "I get it. But Malik, you're going to figure it out. You've come so far. You don't have to write about your whole life, just pick one part of your story that shows who you are now." The rest will fall into place. Her words were simple but comforting. Malik had always been good at focusing on the facts, on the logic and structure of things, but this felt different. This was personal. It was about conveying his heart, his struggles, and his triumphs in a way that made someone see him as more than just a student. As he left school that day, the words Jessica had said echoed in his mind. It wasn't about the perfect essay or the best story. It was about being honest, about the person he had become, not just the one he had been. And though it was terrifying, Malik knew that this essay was his opportunity to tell the world who he was beyond his grades, his awards, and the expectations of others. The days following that conversation felt like a blur. Homework assignments piled up, and Malik continued to study for the SATs, but the personal statement weighed on him in the background. He found himself jotting down random thoughts and ideas in the margins of his notebooks. But it wasn't until he sat down one evening, surrounded by a stack of essays, that Malik finally found the clarity he was looking for. He sat at his desk, the dim light of his desk lamp casting a soft glow on his cluttered workspace, and closed his eyes. He thought about his journey, the moments of fear and doubt, the feelings of isolation, but also the times when everything clicked. The turning point had come not when he scored his first 100% on a test, or when he solved a particularly difficult math problem. It had come when he had stood by his father's side, when he realized that life was about resilience, not perfection. That moment of realization, of knowing that he was more than the circumstances he found himself in, was what he needed to write about. When Malik opened his eyes, his hand moved instinctively to the keyboard. He typed his first sentence, and then another. Slowly, his essay began to take shape. He wrote about the fears that plagued him after his mother's death, about the sudden and unexpected responsibility of being the man of the house, and how he had struggled in the face of adversity. But then he wrote about how he found strength in his relationships, his father's unwavering optimism, his friends' support, and his own ability to adapt and push forward. "I am not the sum of my struggles," he wrote, "but the strength I've built through them." It wasn't perfect, yet. But it felt real. It felt like Malik. As he finished the first draft of his personal statement, Malik sat back in his chair and let out a long, slow breath. It was done. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of relief. The words had come, not as perfectly as he had hoped, but they had come from his heart. And that was what mattered most. Over the next few days, Malik reviewed and revised the essay, tweaking the sentences, refining his ideas. Jessica and Derek were among the first to read it. Jessica, ever the perfectionist, suggested a few minor changes, but her eyes sparkled with pride as she handed it back to him. "You're going to blow them away with this," she said. "This essay? It's not just about your story. It's about who you are. They're going to see that." Derek, on the other hand, was more focused on the story itself, nodding with approval. "I knew there was more to you than just being smart. You've got heart, Malik. That's going to make all the difference." Even though Malik had spent so much time working on the essay, hearing their words of encouragement gave him a new sense of confidence. He realized that they weren't just proud of him for what he'd accomplished academically, they were proud of him for who he had become as a person. And that, he knew, was worth more than any grade or scholarship. The next week, Malik submitted his application to MIT, along with his personal statement, and continued to focus on his schoolwork. But there was a difference now, he wasn't just preparing for the future. He was living fully in the present, with a clear vision of what he wanted. The weight of uncertainty was still there, of course. He had no idea whether he would be accepted into MIT, or where he would go to college, or even what life would look like in a few months. But what Malik had realized over the past year was that he didn't have to have it all figured out. Life was a journey, and all he needed to do was take the next step, trusting that the path would reveal itself as he went. As the days passed, Malik began to embrace the unknown. He no longer feared the challenges ahead. He had faced the worst and come out stronger, and now, he knew that whatever came next, he would be ready. The weeks that followed the submission of Malik's college application seemed to stretch endlessly in front of him. Despite the academic pressures of his senior year, he found himself focused on something other than grades for the first time in years: his future. The question wasn't whether he was smart enough, he knew he was, but whether he was strong enough to pursue what he truly wanted, despite the obstacles in his way. In late October, Malik was presented with another challenge that would test his resolve. It came in the form of a school-wide academic competition, the Science and Engineering Fair, an event that brought the brightest minds from every department together to solve complex, real-world problems. Malik had always been good at solving problems. But this year, it felt different. This was no longer about competing for recognition. It was about proving to himself just how far he had come. At lunch one day, Malik sat with Derek and Jessica, brainstorming ideas for the competition. Derek, always enthusiastic about anything that involved hands-on work, had been rattling off various ideas for a robotics project, while Jessica, who had a knack for biology, suggested they look into sustainable energy solutions. But Malik couldn't help but think back to the things that had shaped him, the struggles with his father's accident, his mother's passing, and how he could channel those emotions into a project that wasn't just about winning. "I've got it," Malik said, breaking into their conversation. "I want to work on a project that helps people who need medical assistance but don't have access to proper care, like an affordable, mobile healthcare solution." Jessica's eyes widened. "That's brilliant. You could design something that helps people who are isolated, whether they live in rural areas or can't afford regular checkups. There's so much potential in that." Derek nodded in agreement. "It's definitely different, but that's what could make it stand out. If you focus on the practicality of it and how it could actually help communities, you'll make a real impact." Malik felt a surge of excitement. It was exactly the kind of project he had been looking for, one that had both a personal connection and the potential to make a real-world difference. He began researching various mobile healthcare technologies, reading about the gaps in medical access in underserved communities, and thinking about how he could design something both functional and affordable. The process wasn't easy. For weeks, Malik dove into research, learning everything he could about medical technology, patient care, and innovative designs. His nights were spent sketching blueprints and figuring out how to create a mobile health unit that would be affordable yet efficient. There were moments of frustration when things didn't work, when the calculations didn't add up, or when the prototype he was working on just didn't look like it should. But Malik pushed through, fueled by the desire to create something that could help others. One afternoon, after several weeks of work, Malik finally had a breakthrough. He had designed a model that could potentially work, a mobile unit that would fit in a standard van, equipped with telemedicine tools, basic diagnostic equipment, and storage for medical supplies. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, and that's all Malik needed. He presented the idea to his teachers, and they were impressed. "This is exactly the kind of project that could change the way we think about healthcare," Mrs. Anderson said. "It's innovative, practical, and addresses a real problem." With his project nearing completion, Malik began feeling the familiar pressure of competition. The Science and Engineering Fair was just around the corner, and he would be presenting his project to a panel of judges who would decide who would move on to the next level. For Malik, this wasn't just about the win. It was about demonstrating that he could push past his personal doubts and create something that mattered. The night before the fair, Malik found himself unable to sleep. The weight of what he was about to present settled heavily on his shoulders. He knew he had done his best, but he also knew that the world of academic competition wasn't always kind. The anxiety was palpable. What if the judges didn't see the value in his project? What if the people in the audience didn't understand the potential impact? But then, he thought about everything he had been through, the loss of his mother, the challenges with his father, the overwhelming pressure to succeed, and realized that none of it had been easy. But he had made it through, each time stronger than before. He wasn't just presenting a project, he was showing the world who he had become. He was breaking through the limits he had once set for himself. The morning of the fair arrived, and Malik was ready. He had spent the night making final adjustments to his mobile healthcare unit, ensuring that everything was in working order. He dressed carefully, feeling a mixture of pride and nerves. As he set up his display at the competition, the room buzzed with energy, students frantically explaining their projects, others reviewing their notes. But for the first time in a long time, Malik felt calm. He was ready for whatever came next. When the judges came to his table, Malik greeted them with a steady handshake. They asked him a series of questions about his design, about the technology behind it, and about how it could be implemented in real-life situations. Malik answered confidently, showing them the research he had done, the data he had gathered, and the work he had put into making his idea come to life. As the judges moved on to the next display, Malik stood back and watched, his heart pounding in his chest. He had done everything he could. Now, it was out of his hands. The award ceremony later that afternoon was a blur. Malik's heart raced as they began announcing the winners, each category building the suspense. When the time came to announce the winners of the Science and Engineering Fair, the room went silent. And the first place award for the Mobile Healthcare Solution category goes to Malik Walker. Malik's mind went blank for a moment. Had he really heard that right? His name echoed through the room, and before he knew it, he was standing in front of the judges, receiving the award. The applause that followed felt surreal, almost like it wasn't real. But as he held the trophy in his hand, it hit him. He had done it. His project wasn't just an idea, it was a real solution that could make a difference. Later that evening, as Malik celebrated with his friends, he felt a sense of pride that went beyond the trophy he had won. This competition had been a turning point for him. It had shown him that the work he had put into his personal growth had paid off, and that he could create something meaningful with his own two hands. His journey wasn't just about academic excellence anymore. It was about embracing the challenges, pushing through the doubts, and ultimately, finding the strength to be himself. As Malik walked through the hallways of his high school in the weeks following his victory at the Science and Engineering Fair, it seemed as if everything had changed. The buzz about his innovative healthcare project had spread like wildfire, and suddenly, everyone was talking about Malik Walker. His peers, who had once seen him as just another quiet kid in the back of the classroom, now looked at him with new respect. Teachers were calling him the one to watch. Even some of the faculty members had begun stopping him in the halls to ask questions about his project. It was both exhilarating and overwhelming. At first, the attention felt like a victory. After all, Malik had worked tirelessly to get where he was, his academic achievements, his scientific accomplishments, he was finally being recognized for the things he had poured his heart into. But with that recognition came an unexpected weight. The pressure was mounting. People had expectations now. They expected Malik to succeed, to go above and beyond, to continue proving that he wasn't just another statistic or another student in the crowd. The next few weeks were a blur of interviews, meetings with college recruiters, and additional applications to other prestigious science competitions. It felt as though Malik's life was accelerating at a pace he wasn't entirely ready for. At home, things were different too. Malik's father had started to make small steps toward recovery, but the journey was long and still uncertain. Malik had been his father's primary caregiver for so long that it was hard to imagine life without that role. Even with the help of nurses and physical therapists, Malik couldn't help but feel like he was still responsible for making sure his father's well-being was ensured. There were nights when Malik would sit in his room, staring at his college application on the screen, unsure whether he was really ready to leave his father behind. The question gnawed at him more and more as each day passed: could he really go off to college, to start his own life, while leaving his father alone to fight his battles? The same question lingered in his conversations with Jessica and Derek. "You're going to make it, Malik," Derek said one afternoon as they sat at their usual lunch table. "MIT's going to accept you. They'd be stupid not to." Jessica nodded in agreement, but there was a serious look in her eyes. "I know it's tough with your dad. But you've been through so much already, Malik. You've done everything you can. You've built this future for yourself. You can't stop now. Malik looked at his friends, appreciating their support, but deep down, he knew that the question was more complicated than just leaving for college. It wasn't about the opportunity that lay ahead, it was about what he would have to leave behind. I know, he said quietly. But it's hard, you know. I want to be there for my dad, but at the same time, I don't want to give up on everything I've worked for. The truth was, Malik didn't have all the answers. He had come so far, and the future felt both exciting and terrifying. The door to MIT was open, but stepping through it meant a leap into the unknown, a leap away from everything he had known for so long. Later that week, Malik received an email that changed everything. It was from MIT, an invitation to interview for their prestigious program. His heart raced as he read through the email. This was it. The moment he had worked for was finally here. The invitation was a recognition of everything he had achieved and everything he could still accomplish. But even as he allowed himself a moment to celebrate, a nagging voice at the back of his mind reminded him of his father's recovery, of his own uncertainty about leaving. The day of the interview came quickly. Malik wore his best suit, carefully chosen for the occasion, and felt a nervous excitement run through him as he sat in the admissions office at MIT. The interviewer was an older woman with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. She welcomed him warmly, and for a moment, Malik felt at ease. But the questions that followed were not as easy. What inspired your project on mobile healthcare? She asked. Malik spoke confidently about his idea, explaining how his mother's passing and his father's accident had fueled his desire to create something that could help others in similar situations. He spoke about the importance of accessibility in healthcare and the impact technology could have on underserved communities. Your story is inspiring, she said. But there's one thing I'm curious about, Malik. You've accomplished so much, but where do you see yourself in the next few years? What's driving you forward? The question caught him off guard. He had always been focused on what was in front of him, the next project, the next test, the next application. But now, as he sat across from the admissions officer, the weight of that question felt heavier than ever. I want to make a difference, Malik said, his voice steady despite the nerves. I want to create solutions for problems that matter, for people who need them most. But I also know that it's not just about the work I do. It's about the people I'm doing it for. My family, my community, they're part of that. The interview continued, but Malik's mind kept returning to that question. What was driving him forward? What was his true purpose? When he left the building, Malik was no longer sure of what he was feeling. The interview had gone well, but something inside him had shifted. It wasn't just about getting into MIT anymore. It wasn't just about the academic recognition or the accolades. It was about something deeper, about the role he wanted to play in the world and in his own life. That night, after the interview, Malik went for a walk to clear his head. The cool fall air brushed against his skin, and he let it fill his lungs as he walked the familiar streets of his neighborhood. He thought about his father, who had struggled so much but always fought back. He thought about his mother, who had dreamed of seeing him succeed. He thought about his friends, who had been by his side through it all, lifting him up when he needed it most. And for the first time in a long time, Malik felt at peace. He didn't have all the answers, but he didn't need to. He had come so far, and wherever he ended up, he knew it would be a place where he could continue to grow, to learn, and to make a difference. As Malik looked up at the starry sky, he made a decision. The road ahead would be challenging, but it was also filled with possibility. And no matter where he went, he would face it with the same strength and determination that had carried him this far. The days following his MIT interview were some of the most nerve-wracking of Malik's life. He felt like he was standing on the edge of something big, yet he wasn't sure what would happen next. Every time he checked his email, his heart skipped a beat, hoping to see the message that would tell him whether his future was about to be shaped by the one school that had always been his dream. But life, as Malik had learned, didn't wait around for the perfect moment. His father's condition continued to improve, but it was clear that Malik's role as his primary caregiver would still be necessary for some time. The balance between school, his family, and his future seemed to be growing more delicate with each passing day. It was as if Malik was walking a tightrope, trying to keep everything from toppling over. One evening, as Malik was sitting at the dinner table with his father, he couldn't help but feel a sense of heaviness in the air. They had made a lot of progress, his father was starting to regain strength and mobility, but there was a new layer of tension that had settled into their relationship. Malik knew his father was proud of him, but there was something unspoken between them now. It wasn't just about the accident anymore, it was about the future, about what Malik would do once he left home for good. "You're going to be amazing, Malik," his father said one evening, breaking the silence as they ate. "I've seen the way you work, the way you think, and I know whatever you do, you'll be successful." Malik felt a lump in his throat. "I don't want to leave you, Dad. Not yet. I want to make sure you're okay." His father's eyes softened. "I'm getting better, son. I need you to focus on your future. You've worked so hard to get here. It's time for you to live your life, to go after your dreams." The word struck Malik harder than he expected. His father's encouragement was exactly what he needed, but it also reminded him of the sacrifice involved. Was he really ready to take that step? Ready to leave the only home he had known, the only place where he felt grounded? "I'm scared," Malik admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I go and something happens here? What if you need me?" His father placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'll be okay. And I'll always be here, cheering you on from the sidelines. You've got to go, Malik. You've earned this." It was the kind of support Malik had longed for, but it also forced him to confront a harsh truth: his time at home was limited. His journey was only beginning, but it was time to start the next chapter, even if it meant leaving behind the safety net he had always known. The following week, Malik received the long-awaited email from MIT. He opened it with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the text. He had been accepted. Malik had made it into MIT. The weight of the moment hit him all at once. This was the culmination of years of work, of overcoming self-doubt, of pushing through the moments when he thought he couldn't go any further. MIT was not just a school, it was a symbol of everything he had overcome, everything he had sacrificed, and everything he had yet to accomplish. As Malik stared at the acceptance letter on his phone screen, he felt a wave of relief and excitement. This was it. This was the beginning of a new chapter in his life. But as quickly as the joy came, it was tempered by a deep sense of responsibility. This wasn't just his success, it was his father's success, too. It was their shared victory. The next day, he called Jessica and Derek to tell them the news. They were overjoyed, their excitement infectious as they congratulated him. "You did it!" Jessica exclaimed over the phone. "I knew you could do it. MIT is going to change everything for you." Derek was equally excited. "Man, you're going to crush it there. I've always known you were destined for greatness." Malik smiled, grateful for their support. But beneath his smile, he was still grappling with the uncertainty of what it all meant. MIT was an incredible opportunity, but it meant leaving behind everything he had worked so hard to build at home. It meant facing the world without the constant safety net he had always relied on. And yet, he knew that this was the moment he had been working toward. The moment when all of his struggles, all of his doubts, would either push him forward or hold him back. And Malik wasn't the type to let fear hold him back. He spent the next few days telling his family about his acceptance. His father, though weak, was bursting with pride. "You've done it, Malik. I knew you had it in you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. His grandmother, who had been with them since his mother passed, also offered her congratulations. I'm so proud of you, Malik. Your mother would be, too. She always believed in you. Malik's heart swelled. He had come so far, but it wasn't just about academic achievement. It was about the people who had helped him along the way, who had believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. They had all invested in his future, and now it was his turn to take that next step. As he sat with his father that night, reflecting on everything that had led him here, Malik realized that the path forward wasn't just about leaving. It was about growing, about finding new ways to help, to serve, and to make a difference in the world. I'll be back, Malik said, squeezing his father's hand. I'm not going anywhere. This is just the beginning. His father smiled, his eyes filled with pride. I know, Malik. I know. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Malik was ready for it. He had spent so much of his life working for this moment. Now, it was time to see what he could do with it. Whatever came next, Malik was ready. He was ready to break free from his fears and step into the future with purpose, with heart, and with the unwavering belief that he was capable of anything. Malik stood at the entrance of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, his heart pounding in his chest. The bustling campus around him felt like a different world compared to the small, familiar streets of his hometown. There was something surreal about it, the towering buildings, the throngs of students with their heads buried in books or laptops, the professors walking with purpose, all of it was so different from the life he had left behind. This was the place he had dreamed of since he was a little boy, yet now that he was standing here, it felt almost too big. Too overwhelming. Could he really fit into this world? Was he ready for everything that came with this new life? A voice broke through his thoughts. You made it, Malik. Derek's excited voice came from behind him. He'd surprised Malik with a visit to the campus to help him settle in. Malik turned to see his best friend standing there, beaming. He was holding 2 large coffees, a grin spread across his face. This place is crazy. Derek continued, his eyes wide as he looked around at the college. I can't believe you're really here. MIT. Man, it's a dream come true. Malik laughed, though there was a nervousness in his smile. Yeah, it's wild. It's just, a lot. Derek clapped him on the back. You've earned it, Malik. You belong here. Don't forget that. Malik couldn't help but feel a swell of gratitude. Derek had been with him through everything, through his late night studying, through all the setbacks, and even through the doubts Malik had wrestled with about his future. Derek was the friend who had kept him grounded when the pressure became too much. But even Derek's confidence couldn't completely silence the voice of uncertainty in Malik's mind. As they walked across the campus, Malik's thoughts began to shift from doubt to focus. It was time to dive in. The semester was beginning, and there was no turning back now. The first few days at MIT were a whirlwind. Classes were rigorous, with professors who expected nothing less than excellence, and the other students were just as driven and passionate as Malik. It was hard to find his place at first, amidst so many bright minds who seemed to have already figured out exactly where they were going. But Malik's own drive began to shine through. He threw himself into his studies, into his research, into the late-night brainstorming sessions and the endless problem-solving that came with his courses. He remembered why he was here, not just for the accolades, but to make a difference in the world. During one of his early classes, he met Professor Jonathan Shaw, an expert in biomedical engineering. Professor Shaw had been one of the first to recognize Malik's potential during his interview, and now, he was more than just a mentor. He was an ally. Malik, Professor Shaw said one afternoon after class, his eyes gleaming with interest, I've been looking over your project proposal. Your mobile healthcare idea is exactly the type of innovation we need. Have you considered working on this full-time? We have some resources here that could help you take it to the next level. Malik's heart skipped a beat. It was one thing to dream big, it was another for someone like Professor Shaw to validate that dream. I hadn't thought about it like that, Malik said, taken aback. I mean, I always thought of it as a side project, something to work on when I had time. But I could really focus on it here. With your help. Professor Shaw nodded. We can get you connected with the right labs, the right people. The funding is available if you're willing to put in the effort. This could be the start of something big, Malik. The excitement Malik felt at that moment was hard to describe. He had come to MIT to learn, to grow, but here, before him, was the potential to turn his passion into something real. Something that could help people. Something that could make a difference. For the next few weeks, Malik threw himself into his research. Between classes, he would head to the labs, working on the technical aspects of his mobile healthcare project. It wasn't easy. The pressure to excel was intense, and there were moments when he questioned whether he could handle it all. There were moments when it felt as though he was swimming in a sea of brilliant minds, hoping he wouldn't drown. But then, something unexpected happened. One evening, as he sat alone in the lab, struggling with a coding problem, a message appeared on his phone. It was from his father. How's everything going, Malik? I'm so proud of you. Keep pushing. You're going to do amazing things. His father's words brought a smile to Malik's face. He was thousands of miles away, yet still, his father's support felt like a lifeline. The reminder that he wasn't alone, that his family was still cheering him on, gave Malik the strength to push through the challenges. The next day, Malik went into his lab with renewed determination. He worked through the issues in his project with a new sense of focus, determined not to let the pressure get to him. Slowly but surely, things started to come together. The mobile healthcare application he was developing began to take shape, and Malik realized that he was actually starting to make progress. Still, every day at MIT wasn't without its challenges. He missed home, missed his father, and missed the familiarity of his old life. There were nights when the loneliness crept in, and Malik found himself sitting in his dorm room, staring at the walls and wondering if he was truly making the right decision. It was hard to silence those doubts, especially when the weight of his responsibilities back home hung heavy in his mind. But then, during one of those quiet nights, Jessica sent him a text, I know it's tough, but I believe in you. MIT is just the beginning. You've got this. Those words, simple but meaningful, gave Malik the boost he needed to keep going. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to give up now. As the weeks passed, Malik found his rhythm. He made new friends, attended lectures that challenged him in new ways, and kept his eyes on the bigger picture, his project, his future, and the people he wanted to help. With each passing day, he grew more confident that he was where he was meant to be. The future was still uncertain, but Malik was no longer afraid of it. He was ready. Ready to make an impact. Ready to take the lessons he had learned and use them to change the world. And for the first time in a long time, Malik felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The days and weeks continued to blur together as Malik settled deeper into life at MIT. The campus, once intimidating and overwhelming, had become a familiar landscape, a place where every corner held potential, every interaction was an opportunity for growth. It was a space where Malik could finally breathe freely, where the world seemed to open up in front of him, not as an obstacle, but as a canvas waiting for his mark. He had come a long way since his first hesitant steps onto the campus. The same doubts that had plagued him in the beginning, about fitting in, about being good enough, had slowly faded. He was finding his footing, not just as a student, but as a person with the power to make a difference. It was a journey that was just beginning, and the road ahead felt full of possibility. One afternoon, Malik sat in his favorite spot at the campus library. The bright sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow across the room. He had a few hours before his next class, so he decided to take some time to reflect. As he looked over his notes and the progress he had made with his mobile healthcare project, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He remembered his first day in the lab, the overwhelming sense of being out of his depth, unsure if he could even make a dent in the complexities of the task before him. But now, the project was beginning to take shape. The app he had been developing to improve access to healthcare for underserved communities was evolving into something real, something tangible. It wasn't just an idea anymore, it was a project that could change lives. Malik's mind raced with possibilities for the future. He could see the impact it would have, how it could bridge gaps, save lives, and provide resources to those who needed it most. And then there was the recognition. The buzz about his work was starting to grow. It wasn't just the professors who were taking notice, his peers were, too. One of his classmates, Clara, had asked if she could collaborate on the project, bringing in her expertise in data science to refine some of the app's algorithms. Other students had expressed interest in helping with beta testing, and word had gotten out that Malik was working on something innovative. The once shy, unsure student who had feared being overlooked was now being seen, really seen, for his potential. As Malik reflected on all of this, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see Derek standing behind him, holding a familiar cup of coffee. "You look deep in thought," Derek said with a grin. "What's going on in that genius brain of yours?" Malik smiled, setting his notes aside. "Just thinking about everything that's happened. It's a lot, man. It feels like I'm actually making something happen here." Derek nodded, taking a seat next to him. "You are. I've seen it. You've got that fire in you, Malik. And you're using it. You're going to do big things. I have no doubt about it." Malik's heart swelled with gratitude. Derek had been there since the beginning, believing in him even when he couldn't believe in himself. His support, and the support of others who had cheered him on, had been the foundation of his success. "You've been a big part of that," Malik said, looking his friend in the eye. "You've always pushed me to go for more. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you." Derek shrugged, a modest smile on his face. "It's all you, man. I'm just along for the ride. But I'm proud to be here with you, to see you do this." The next few months at MIT were a whirlwind. Malik was involved in numerous projects, and his healthcare app was becoming more sophisticated with every iteration. He was also beginning to form lasting relationships with his professors and fellow students. One professor, in particular, Professor Shah, had become a mentor. He encouraged Malik to apply for a grant to take his project to the next level, something Malik had never considered before. The thought of seeking funding and pitching his idea to investors was daunting, but Professor Shah's confidence in him gave Malik the courage to take that next step. Malik continued to learn and grow, absorbing everything MIT had to offer while also contributing his own perspective. He spent countless hours in the lab, refining his app, tweaking the algorithms, and working on the user interface to make sure it was as intuitive as possible. He spoke at tech conferences, networking with people who could help bring his vision to life. He even began receiving offers to collaborate with medical organizations interested in utilizing the technology he was developing. One evening, Malik stood outside the lab, his gaze turned upward as the first stars of the evening appeared in the sky. He had just finished another long day of work. His body was exhausted, but his mind was alive with possibilities. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs, and for a moment, he allowed himself to savor the stillness. This was his moment. This was the beginning of something much bigger than just his time at MIT. It was a moment that felt like a culmination of everything he had worked for, the culmination of all the struggles, the sacrifices, and the dreams that had pushed him forward. But even as Malik stood there, looking at the stars, his thoughts turned back to his father. Malik hadn't been able to go home much since coming to MIT, but they kept in touch regularly. His father had continued to improve, and Malik knew that part of the success he was experiencing was thanks to the sacrifices his family had made for him. His father's words echoed in his mind, "I'm getting better, son. I need you to focus on your future. You've worked so hard to get here. It's time for you to live your life." Malik had taken those words to heart, and now, as he stood on the brink of something monumental, he knew that his journey was far from over. It was just beginning. MIT had opened doors for him, but it wasn't just about the degree or the accolades. It was about making a difference. It was about using his knowledge, his experiences, and his passion to create a world that was more just, more equitable, and more accessible to all. As Malik turned back toward the building and headed inside, he felt a quiet confidence settle within him. The road ahead was still long, and the challenges were still many. But he knew one thing for sure: he was ready. Ready for whatever came next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?